The Southern Reach trilogy is an award-winning novel that describes a fascinating exploration of a mysterious wilderness. But the book leaves many readers confused afterward because the plot jumps back and forth in time. So this video is intended to explain what exactly happens in chronological order. The story starts with Science and Science Brigade. This is a research entity backed by a government agency called Central. The head of Central, his name is Jack Severance. He has a daughter whose name is Jackie Severance. She has a son whose name is John Rodriguez. John is actually the main character of the second book, Authority, who's also referred to as Control. Now back to Science and Science Brigade. Two members of the team, Henry and Suzanne, come to a lighthouse on Failure Island. What they're after is some kind of dark science, experimenting and exploring alien energy, and that involves them poking around and experiment with lights. The lighthouse keeper, whose name is Saul, he's not very happy with the two of them messing with the beacon, but he isn't able to do much about it, and he has to live with them. Saul has a lover whose name is Charlie, and there's also a little girl who comes to hang out. Her name is Gloria. Now, Gloria later changes her name to Cynthia, who becomes the former director of the Southern Reach. And Cynthia also becomes the psychologist of the later 12th expedition back into Area X. There is a photo of the three of them together with Saul red circled, and this photo appears a couple of times later in the story. So one day, one of Henry and Suzanne's experiments triggers a light fragment that falls onto a weed. And Saul spotted this sparkling thing and he touched it with his finger and immediately got infected. The thing is what we may think of as an intelligence that is alien or had lived in a symbiosis but had never been exposed, and that once it comes out would create a completely different ecosystem. So this is actually the initial trigger event of the formation of Area X. The thing starts to manifest within Saul until one night when he is at a bar, his body is completely taken over, he turns into a monster and kills a bunch of people around him. He sees blood everywhere and realizes that something horrible had happened, and he runs back to the lighthouse. And over there he sees that under the influence of Area X, Henry has been cloned into a doppelganger who had then killed the original Henry and Suzanne. Saul and the new Henry start fighting. Both of them fell off the ledge of the lighthouse, killing the new Henry. At that point, Saul remembers that his lover Charlie is out there fishing in the ocean, so he flees the opposite direction to be as far away from Charlie as possible until he cannot run any further. And there, in the middle of the forest, he turns into this inverted tower, spiraling down into the ground. A part of his body becomes the wall. And we learn pretty early in the book that the wall of the tower feels like a breathing organism. And there are also words written all over it that's made of some type of fungi or eukaryotic organisms that makes it look like fern-like moss. Here's an illustration made by Nervous System blog, which I felt is a great representation of how it is described in the book. So the words themselves read like sermon, and that is because Saul used to be a preacher for many years of his life, so in panic, part of his subconscious here turns into these strange writings on the wall, and then his brain becomes this thing called a crawler. In Book 1, Annihilation, the 12th expedition actually takes a sample of the crawler and finds it to be human brain tissue. So this whole structure, as the Southern Reach referred to as topographical anomaly or a tower or tunnel, if we think about it, it's really a mirrored structure of the lighthouse where Saul lived. And why is it inverted? Probably because Saul is trying to hide and destroy what he had become. Now, at this point, something else also happens, and people may not have the same interpretation with me on this one, and I very much welcome different opinions, but I think that this event also sets off the formation of the border of Area X. Because, you don't always question why there's a border to begin with. Like, why didn't Area X just take over the entire globe when it starts? And one of the details that jumped out to me when I was reading the book is this idea brought up by one of the Southern Reach scientists that they don't actually know whether the formation of Area X and the border came from the same event, nor could they prove that the purpose of Area X is the same of that of the border, which makes me think that the formation of the border actually may have something to do with Saul's effort to hide and destroy himself and protect the outside world from this infection. And I want to mention a few other clues that support this theory. In the 12th expedition, before the psychologist dies in front of the biologist, she says she realizes that they should have never come in here. And then the biologist, in reading journals from prior expeditions, suspects that when the crawler reaches the end of each cycle, Area X will enter a convulsive season of barricades and blood, a kind of cataclysmic molting. She sees growing cones of energy rising above the tower and spilling out into the surrounding wilderness, which all seems to suggest that every time human interacts with Area X, Saul's will gets weakened and he marches down further and the border expands. So this is ultimately a futile protection from a slow death because, humans are driven by curiosity and there's just no way for them to stop sending people and stuff into Area X, which ironically keeps getting assimilated, making Area X stronger. So fighting against it is a fallacy. By the way, I'm drawing a line here to represent the border, but in the book, it is something that's quite indescribable, possibly a time warp that leads into a distorted time and space. The movie Annihilation painted the border as a shimmer through which lights and everything else get refracted. The book also sometimes describes it as a membrane, but in any case, what the border represents is this idea that each time you get in or out, it changes you fundamentally. Ever since humans notices this phenomenon, they set up the Southern Reach right outside of the border to study Area X. And among the first expedition that is sent into it, there is a man named Lowry, who is the first director and also the only survivor of that trip. There's a footage from Lowry's video camera witnessing one of the teammates being copied, and also at one point, the doppelganger of himself is fighting with him. One version of Lowry returns and keeps influencing and commanding the Southern Reach. They send waves of expeditions, the second, the third, all the way to the 12th. Most of them never return. All expeditions are constructed quite consistently. There are always a psychologist, a biologist, a surveyor, an anthropologist, and a linguist. They are stripped of their names, so they only remember their purpose, and they apply hypnotic suggestions to keep them calm. So you could almost argue that by joining the expeditions, you're never the same person anymore because you're not just a scientist, but also a part of a death squad. Now, there's more to Lowry that I want to come back to, very critical pieces that dictates the development of the entire subsequent events. And I want to come back to that later, and for now, let's talk through what happens in later expeditions first. Remember earlier that we talked about this little girl, Gloria? Because she came from the, prehistoric Area X, she wants to find out what exactly had happened to this place. She changes her name to Cynthia and applies several times to work for the Southern Reach before she finally gets in. Lowry knows from the very beginning what her real background is, but he keeps it off the record and in return also gains the ability to manipulate her. Right before the 11th expedition, Cynthia and Whitby, one of the scientists, have a secret trip into Area X during which they explore the lighthouse and also the topographical anomaly. And there, Cynthia sees Saul's face telling her that she really shouldn't be there. And during that trip, Whitby also gets cloned. One version survives and comes back to the Southern Reach. And ever since his return, Whitby becomes very strange, including drawing in the darkroom this image of what he saw in Area X, where all species blend together. And here I'm using this European version of the trilogy book cover, When I first saw this art illustration, it immediately reminded me of Whitby, and it's like, oh, that must be the thing that Whitby is drawing. After the 11th expedition, all but one end up coming back. The psychologist of that trip later revealed to have turned into the moaning creature of the reeds, and the remaining of the crew, even though they're back, all end up dying from cancer. One of the returners is the husband of the biologist of the 12th expedition. And so now we're just getting into the storyline of Book 1, Annihilation. The first book is all about the 12th expedition and has the biologist as the protagonist. She is the character portrayed by Natalie Portman in the movie. And she's a critical and very interesting character in the whole series. So obviously her husband's death is one motivation for her to go in. But that aside, she's also sort of intuitive towards the environmental side more than the human side. From the book's description, she's the type of person that doesn't like people very much. She didn't grow up in a particularly healthy family, which caused her to enjoy spending time alone, observing the nature and biological stuff. So from that perspective, she's a very good candidate to figure out what Area X is trying to achieve, creating this new ecosystem. But then the downside is also that she's tougher to manipulate from a psychological perspective because she's so used to shielding herself from emotions, which include even having trouble forming an emotional attachment with her husband, and that is unfortunate for their prior relationship. In her journey in Book 1, she explores the inverted tower and the lighthouse, during which she battles with the psychologist and the surveyor. I'm just going to skip the details and jump directly to some of the endings. So good news is that a version of her did eventually encounter a version of her husband, who had at that point turned into an owl. Her herself turns into so she got copied, and the original version turns into a marine creature, which may have something to do with her childhood obsession observing her swimming pool, and her doppelganger comes back as Ghostbird and continues the journey in Book 2 and 3. Jackie's son John comes into picture after the 12th expedition as he becomes the new director of the Southern Reach. The second book, Authority, is all about John, or Control, through his interrogation of Ghostbird and from science department and prior footage, trying to piece together the whole story, while the entire time he is controlled and monitored and hypnotized by the voice, who later revealed to be Lowry. Control is portrayed as a detective throughout the book, and the book also talks about his relationship with his mom and his grandpa a couple of times, and it seems as if Jackie is using his son, but also in a way to protect him by building his character towards the point where he has what it takes to figure things out on his own. And then the day comes when Area X expands to the Southern Reach site. Control barely gets out of it in time, and during that time he witnesses a version of the psychologist coming back, and the assistant director Grace and the rest of the science department all get sucked in. He later finds Ghostbird near another entrance into Area X that looks like a whirlpool, and they both jump in. And during that trip, they swim by the original Lowry and realize that he had become a megalodon type of creature. Inside of Area X, the two of them find that things have decayed a lot faster. They run into the assistant director Grace, who claims to have been there for 30 years. The three of them then encounter the original biologist, the one I turned into a sea monster, at the lighthouse. They end up marching down into the tower, and that is the first time John witnesses the crawler. And the moment he does that, he realizes how everything had happened and what that thing is. And his role as a detector and investigator is now complete. And he jumps into the light surrounding Saul. After Ghostbird and Grace come back out, there is a scene describing the two of them walking past by the ruined Southern Reach site, which has become its own ecosystem at the time. And the storyline ends with the two of them walking on for a very long time, throwing pebbles at the air, detecting if there is still a border that exists. So that is the entire chronological development of the events. Now I want to come back to Lowry and talk about two details that are later revealed in the third book that I thought are very important. One of them is that there is a cell phone Cynthia found in Area X during her secret trip prior to the 11th expedition that she believes to belong to Lowry and for him to communicate with Area X. And what that means is that whatever version of Lowry that came back might have been working for Area X instead of against it ever since. And that changes the entire perspective of what the Southern Reach has been doing, which is that the whole subsequent expeditions could have been a trick used by Area X to keep assimilating the best of human intelligence to make itself stronger and smarter. Another interesting detail in Book 3 is this conversation between Cynthia and Lowry where she refers to him as Jim. And why does she call him Jim? Remember the night of Saul's transformation? So one of the guys who were killed is called Old Jim. So does it mean that Lowry is actually the son of Old Jim? We'll never find out, but in any case, it wouldn't be crazy to assume that Lowry does have some prior association with the prehistoric Area X, and that would explain his attempt to save this place in his own way and why he knows about Cynthia's story from the very beginning. The book ends with this letter written from Gloria or Cynthia to Saul prior to the 12th expedition in which she says to him basically, "Hey man, the whole thing is not your fault, and I still remember you the way you were."